Hey, welcome back to ScreenCrush. I'm Ryan Airy. The Acolyte is doing something no Star Wars movie or show has done since the original trilogy. The show will take us 100 years before the prequels, and it is set in the High Republic era. This was a golden age for the Jedi and the Republic, who were at their height of power and idealism. High Republic is a very interesting era because there were no Sith around, but there were other enemies and conflicts that reshaped the galaxy. We're going to talk about the book characters that are going to appear in the show and why the High Republic is so important to what is happening with the Jedi and the Acolyte. The High Republic is an ambitious story, and it's a lot to get into, but it's also really good. And we're going to explain everything you need to know about the High Republic era before watching the Acolyte.
For over 1,000 generations, the Jedi Knights were the guardians of peace and justice in the Old Republic, before the Dark Times, before the Empire.
The Acolyte is set 100 years before the prequels, taking place at the tail end of the High Republic era in about the year 132 BBY, BBY standing for Before the Battle of Yavin. For reference, The Phantom Menace is set in 32 BBY. The High Republic era starts at around 500 BBY, but the main story is set at 232 BBY.
So what's the story with the High Republic?
Well, the High Republic is this sprawling story that is told across many novels, young adult novels, comic books, children's books, and even a kid's cartoon. The era was also featured in the really awesome game Jedi Survivor, and the upcoming game Star Wars Eclipse is set in the High Republic era. So the main thing about the High Republic is the Jedi. During this era, the Jedi were completely different from how they were in the Clone Wars, and pretty much every other era that followed.
What was so different about them?
Well, they were everything that the Jedi were meant to be, true galactic heroes. They simply did the right thing and let the Force guide them. The majority of the Jedi in the movies and shows are always limited by dogmatic codes that ultimately led to their downfall. Some of the best Jedi in the Clone Wars era, like Anakin Skywalker, Ahsoka Tano, and Qui-Gon Jinn, went against the Council and sort of found their own path. They were seen as outliers who refused to align with the Order's strict codes.
Do not defy the Council, Master, not again.
I shall do what I must, Obi-Wan.
But in the High Republic, most Jedi were like that. The Order was way more flexible with its ideals and codes, and the Jedi chose how they interpreted the Force and their own role in the galaxy. One thing I love about the High Republic is how much it humanizes the Jedi. We meet Force users like Elzar Mann, who, very long story short, has attachment problems. His love of another Jedi is almost like an addiction to him. Now, I'll talk about him at length later, but he even uses the dark side of the Force, and then has to immediately undergo a kind of therapy to break off that addiction before it becomes a real problem. And this kind of thing humanizes the Jedi in a way that we never got to see in the prequels. I know that I have personally struggled with my bad habits. Like whenever I get stressed, I always develop an oral fixation habit. It can be like eating or squishing my face or clenching my jaw. It's really unhealthy. So I needed something to help me forget those bad oral fixation habits and replace them with a positive habit. And that's why I started using Fume. They're the sponsor of this video.
Oh, is that a vape?
No, this is not a vape, it is not electronic, and it doesn't have pods filled with potentially harmful chemicals. Instead, it has these plant-based cores that are infused with natural flavors to create natural flavored air. You see guys, flavored air is quickly becoming the leading alternative to vaping and smoking. Fume contains no nicotine, so it is not addictive, and it contains non-toxic flavors. It contains plant-based flavors like spearmint ice, orange vanilla, black licorice, and my current favorite, cinnamon hearts. Tastes like warm cinnamon spice. So guys, with flavored air, you can satisfy your oral fixation through a passive diffusion system that does not use electronics, vapor, or combustion. But mostly, I like that it still gives me something to reach for when I'm feeling anxious. It even has movable parts for fidgeting that make an incredibly satisfying sound. Fume makes switching easy and even fun. They have thousands of 5-star reviews from their more than 300,000 customers who have used Fume to change their lives, and you can be their next success story. So for a limited time, use my code ScreenCrush to get your free Fume base when you order your Journey Pack. This is the all-new magnetic stand for your Fume device. Head to tryfume.com, that's tryfum.com, and use code ScreenCrush or scan this QR code on screen to get your free Fume base when you order your Journey Pack today. Now back to what I was saying.
So why were the Jedi so much better during the High Republic?
Well, you see, the galaxy enjoyed a long period of peace and prosperity. The Jedi-Sith War ended about 500 years before the start of the High Republic era, and the Sith were believed to be all gone. They weren't, of course, and we will see the start of their return in the Acolyte.
The Sith have been extinct for a millennium.
I do not believe the Sith could have returned without us knowing.
Liar! But the Sith had a very minimal presence in this era. So, without major conflicts, the Jedi and the Republic were able to flourish. The High Republic Jedi were able to fulfill their true potential as Force users and heroes. This showed how they could shine so bright when they refused to allow bureaucracy and dogmatic creeds to cloud their ideals. Honestly, this is how Luke's new Jedi Order should have been in the sequels, but instead...
It's time for the Jedi to end.
The purity of the Jedi is highlighted by their gold and white robes. They also wielded lightsabers with unique and various designs and colors. The Jedi were spread out across the galaxy, and they were ready to help anyone who needed their help, no matter what.
Because that's what heroes do.
The Jedi could also take on different roles, like healers, investigators, and my personal favorite, the Wayseekers, who operated independently from the Council, and instead they let the Force guide them fully. The Jedi of this era were also way more attuned to the Force, and this unlocks special abilities that we don't usually see in Star Wars, like, for example, Avar Kriss, who is one of the best characters in the High Republic. She perceives the Force as music, so she can create this telepathic bond with other Jedi, sort of like Professor X in the X-Men.
To me, my X-Men.
And what I love about the Jedi in this era is that they actually care about the people of the galaxy and even about each other. There's still that pesky no attachment rule, but the Jedi develop strong relationships and friendships. There's a lot more of that kind of Anakin and Obi-Wan bromance during this era.
Do control your protege's insolence so I can concentrate.
Anakin, what? Control your insolence. The Count is concentrating.
Some Jedi even end up falling in love. The most compelling aspect of the Jedi in this era is that they don't shun members who make mistakes or even have brushes with the dark side. For example, Elzar Mann, who is one of my favorite characters in the High Republic, almost falls to the dark side at one point. Without spoiling anything major, in case you want to get into the series, Elzar is basically this era's Anakin, but without going full Vader.
Hold on.
He's in love with the other Jedi I mentioned, Avar Kriss. Elzar sees terrible visions of the future, and when they come true, in his anger, he touches and uses the dark side. But when Elzar tells his best friend Stellan Gios that he touched the dark side, Stellan doesn't immediately condemn Elzar. Instead, he offers his support and helps him work through things. And Elzar goes on a sabbatical and he finds his way back into the light, without having any urge to slaughter younglings.
It's not fair.
Now, if something like that had happened in the prequel era, Elzar would have been expelled from the Order and probably imprisoned. It's something so simple, but this really shows the stark difference between the High Republic Jedi and the ones in the prequels, and even the Jedi in the New Republic era.
I've seen this raw strength only once before, in Ben Solo. It didn't scare me enough then. It does now.
This is the reason why the Jedi of the High Republic rock. Now, we're not going to go over each and every one of them because, well, there are so many awesome characters, and as much as I want to, we cannot talk about them all. But there's one character that you need to know, and that is Vanessa Rwo. She is a Jedi that will appear in the Acolyte.
I sense this is only a small part of a larger plan.
Vanessa is the youngest Jedi Master ever.
You are on this council, but we do not grant you the rank of Master.
What?
Vanessa has this Force ability that sort of works like a Spidey sense.
Spidey sense going crazy.
And when she travels in hyperspace, she sees visions of the future. Vanessa does not use a traditional lightsaber. Instead, she's got a purple light whip. After losing someone close to her, Vanessa becomes a Wayseeker. And with the looming Sith return in the Acolyte, it's going to be really interesting how Vanessa reacts, because she was the master of a Jedi who had a brush with the dark side. The young Jedi, Imri Kantaros, becomes obsessed with revenge and almost falls to the dark side, even attacking Vernestra. Imri and Vernestra are friends, and she helps him overcome his anger. She becomes his master and teaches him to be better.
Anakin, Chancellor Palpatine is evil! From my point of view, the Jedi are evil! Well, then you are lost!
Although, with the Sith poking their heads out in the Acolyte, the Jedi would stop being so understanding and open with their ideals. And this explains why the Jedi are the way they are in the Clone Wars era, which is so ironic because we know what's going to happen to the Jedi, and it's all their fault. Anyways, during the High Republic era, the Jedi weren't hogtied to the self-serving Republic, and that's because the Jedi were a completely separate entity from the Republic, so they didn't have to answer to the Senate. But the Republic was also doing really good work in this era. It was an age of expansion and exploration. The Jedi and the Republic worked together to chart new hyperspace routes across the galaxy. This allowed them to improve life for many systems outside of the core worlds, especially those Outer Rim territories. And you know how those worlds are. They were always lawless and filled with criminals because the Republic and the Jedi were neglecting the Outer Rim.
Yeah, but it's also where all the best characters live.
That is very true. Pirates, bounty hunters, smugglers, and Mandalorians.
You will never find a more wretched hive of scum and villainy.
In this era, hyperspace lanes were still discovered, so the Outer Rim was the new frontier in the High Republic era. And the Republic built a space station that served as a beacon in the Outer Rim, and its name is Starlight Beacon.
So it's a nicer version of the Death Star?
No, not at all. It's a bastion of hope, a type of lighthouse and cultural center. Think of it like the Citadel in Mass Effect. And this brings us to the story, starting with Phase 1.
Phase 1, what, like it's the MCU?
Well, sort of. The High Republic story is divided into 3 phases. Phase 1 starts at 382 BBY, and then Phase 2 jumps 150 years in the past and it explores the events that led to what happens in Phase 1. And then Phase 3 continues the stories from Phase 1, now with the context of the past from Phase 2.
Oh, so it's like the movies. They did the original trilogy, and then the prequels, and then the sequels.
Oh, that's a really good point. I didn't even think of it like that. High five! So, the High Republic opens with the first book in the series, Light of the Jedi. The golden age of peace and prosperity is cut short when the great hyperspace disaster happens. A freight transport called the Legacy Run is mysteriously destroyed while traveling in hyperspace. Now, the ship is torn apart, and the debris are shot out of hyperspace, raining fire on many worlds across the galaxy. This is the inciting incident of the High Republic series. The Legacy Run was destroyed by a mysterious new enemy called the Nihil.
Are they Sith?
No, they have nothing to do with the Sith, at least as far as we know. The Nihil are basically space Vikings. They're marauders and pirates who oppose the Republic's expedition in the Outer Rim. The Nihil can access hyperspace lanes that were impossible to traverse by anyone else.
How do they do that?
Well, this is because they have a special captive, a Force-sensitive woman named Mary Santaka. She uses the Force to find these special paths. The Nihil have special engines that allow them to attack ships while they're in hyperspace, and this is how they destroyed the Legacy Run. But there's more. There's a deeper layer to these villains. The Nihil are led by Vanessa Rwo. Rwo's family was part of a Jedi-hating cult called the Path of the Open Hand. They believed that use of the Force should not be allowed because it could lead to death and destruction in the galaxy.
Yeah, well, you know, that's just like your opinion, man.
Things got ugly 150 years before the events of Phase 1 after the Path started a war against the Jedi. The Path used these monsters that feed on the Force called the Nameless, although they're also known as the Levelers. The Nameless can sever a Jedi's connection to the Force. They can also create terrifying hallucinations and eventually kill the Jedi and turn their bodies into lifeless husks. After the Jedi defeated the Path, Marta Rwo formed the Nihil. Marta wanted revenge against the Jedi, and that is how her great-grandson Marchion is fulfilling her plans to destroy the Jedi Order. After the Great Hyperspace Disaster, the Jedi rescue civilians and help anyone who is hurt. Afterwards, the Jedi start investigating who's responsible, and the trail leads them to the Nihil. At the same time, a group of Jedi accidentally awaken dark side creatures called the Drengir. They are plant-like carnivorous monsters that corrupt the minds of others with the dark side, even the Jedi.
Feed me, Carbon! Feed me now!
I can't.
I'm starving!
The Nihil use the Drengir to spread chaos across the Outer Rim and keep the Jedi distracted. So the Jedi have to team up with the Hutts to defeat the Drengir. Vanessa Rwo then tricks the Jedi and the Republic into believing that the Nihil were defeated in battle.
It's a trap!
But then the Nihil strike back and attack Jedi and Republic outposts. Rwo unleashes the Nameless, and the creatures are a huge threat, even killing some major Jedi characters. And then the Nihil attack and destroy Starlight Beacon. Now this ends up being a massive blow, and a few Jedi almost fall to the dark side. The Nihil activate a device that destabilizes hyperspace travel in the Outer Rim. They cut off a big chunk of the Outer Rim by creating a storm wall. It's like a kind of space wall that prevents hyperspace travel. Many Jedi are trapped behind the wall, and no one can enter or leave this area except the Nihil. And this is the cliffhanger that ends Phase 1. Phase 2 jumps 150 years into the past.
What, after all that, they do a flashback?
Yeah, at the time, this was really jarring. But Phase 2 gives us a lot of context and backstory for Vanessa Rwo and the Nameless. In 382 BBY, the Path of the Open Hand was led by Alicia Zeveron, who is also known as the Mother. She found an egg containing the Great Leveler, one of the Nameless. The Path also stole the Rod of Seasons, and Alicia used it to control the Nameless. The Path weaponized the Force-feeding monsters to start a conflict against the Jedi. The war came to an end on the planet Dalna, in a devastating battle that is known as the Night of Sorrow. Many Jedi were killed by the Nameless, but ultimately the Path were defeated and fractured. All of the Nameless were believed to be killed, so Yoda had the bright idea to keep their existence a secret and erase any information about them from the Jedi archives. And everyone knows that
if an item does not appear in our records, it does not exist.
That little green guy is a stinky little liar.
Yeah, it ain't the last time he's going to cover up important information about an ancient enemy or secret sisters. Phase 3 takes place 1 year after the destruction of Starlight Beacon. Now, there isn't much to say about the story of Phase 3 so far.
Or why not?
Well, it literally just started, so it's still ongoing and will conclude in 2025. But the main conflict of Phase 3 is that everyone is stranded. There are many Jedi who are trapped behind the Nihil storm wall. And at the same time, other Jedi and the Republic cannot help them because only the Nihil can travel through the barrier. And on top of that, the Nameless are still around, feeding on Force users. That being said, by the time we get to the Acolyte, the Nihil and the Nameless will be defeated. That's not a spoiler, by the way. It's actually confirmed in the short story The Veteran by Adam Lance Garcia, a friend of the channel. However, the damage the Nihil cause will explain why the Jedi and the Republic will start their transformation into the way they are in the Clone Wars era. The conflict with the Nihil could be the reason why the Republic ends up neglecting the Outer Rim. While the Jedi will probably destroy the Nihil Stormwall, by that point the Outer Rim will be in so much chaos that the Republic will just abandon the area. The Outer Rim will fall into lawlessness, where criminals thrive and innocents become slaves. And one day, one of those slaves will grow up and become a Jedi and then kill everyone. And more importantly, here's why the Nihil are so important for the Acolyte. Like we mentioned earlier, many Jedi were close to falling to the dark side in High Republic. But in the Acolyte, the Jedi will learn that the Sith were not extinct after all. This revelation will make the Council be far less understanding, and they will enforce the Jedi's dogmatic codes. And this will set the Jedi Order on a path of their eventually tragic downfall. So, that's everything you need to know about the High Republic before watching The Acolyte. And hopefully, The Acolyte's going to be great, because I really want to see more stories in the High Republic era. Guys, big shout out to the writer and editor of this video, Mr. Pavel T. You can find his links below. So, who's your favorite High Republic character, and what's your favorite story? And which Jedi do you think will appear in The Acolyte? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments or at me on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe and smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.